Hello, my name is Alicia Lindberg and this is my video presentation of a minor investigation of a language awareness issue that I found amongst my English language learners. I will look closer to the issue I found amongst my students with extinguishing the difference between they and the. I will do this by explaining the procedure, the findings, and my conclusions from these. But first, I'm going to walk you through the background when it comes to the participants of the study, that being my students, and also the definition of language awareness. So, when it comes to the background, we could start by talking about how I came in contact with the issue being discussed in this presentation. Around this time a year ago, I had my VFU in an upper secondary school located in the south of Sweden. In my 4 weeks in this school, I had around 12 sessions with a first grade class in English 5. Pretty quickly, I started noticing how the students mix up the words de and they, but only when it came to writing. In the oral use of the language, this issue didn't even exist, while in the written use of the language, the majority of the students in the class had this problem. I found that kind of interesting. So when I returned to the school for my VFU in the end of last year and found that I would have the same class in English 6, I started to look at this phenomena again. This is a homogeneous class of only boys in the age of 17 who all studies to become either electricians or computer engineers. So, what is language awareness then? Language awareness can be defined as explicit knowledge about language and conscious perception and sensitivity in language learning and language teaching and language use. When talking about explicit knowledge or explicit learning, I'm talking about the students being conscious about the learning process and the knowledge that they possess. If they're not aware or if it's unconscious, then it's implicit and not explicit. Donma describes language awareness as the following. Language awareness is a person's sensitivity to and conscious awareness of the nature of a language and its role in human life. So as Swaber says, detection without awareness is simply registration. I will come back to that later in my conclusion. Schmidt talks about this in his noticing hypothesis, where he claims that it's critical for the learning process that learners notice details and differences between the target language and their production. This means that it's necessary for learners to notice the errors they are making. I will look at this in the procedure to see if my students are aware of the errors that they are making, and I will come back to that in the conclusion too. So, to the procedure then. When I was out on my VFU, my students got to do different kind of tasks to see how big of an issue this actually was in their particular class. The students knew that I was observing their language awareness, and I asked them if they knew anything that they had trouble with. But they couldn't come up with anything, and I didn't tell them that I was looking at their ability to detect the difference between they and the. They did 2 different writing essays. The first being an analysis of a Macbeth, where I walked around and reminded them to check the grammar. I didn't point out where the errors were being done, but I did tell them to look for errors that it did between they and the. So let them find them themselves, but they knew that they were supposed to look for it. The other writing assignment was a fictional essay where they got to imagine if they had superpowers. This time I didn't tell them to look for the mistakes, but instead focused on other things such as structure and following the instructions. I did this to see if they would notice the mistakes themselves. For the grammar test, it involved a specific task where the students got to choose between de and they, but also other tasks such that focused on other grammar specifics, but still involved using they and their to see if it was a difference between when they knew that they were supposed to look at they and their and when they were unconscious about it. Then, for the oral use of the language, the students got to do an oral presentation of a music group of their choice. But they also walked around in the 4 weeks I was there. I walked around amongst the students and listened to many minor group activities where the students had to make conversations with each other. What was I looking at while I was doing this? My main focus questions while I observed and analyzed the students through these 4 weeks, except for the obvious one, if the students actually knew the difference, were the following 3. Number 1, did awareness help the students? So, was there a difference between when they actively thought about this particular issue or when it occurred unconsciously? Number 2, are the students able to correct themselves? When told to look for an error, are the students able to notice it? In that case, the problem isn't that the student is unaware of the rules. Number 3, so are the students aware? If not, how can we help them? And if they are aware, then where does the problem really lies? So for the findings and the results that I found after my 4 weeks or approximately 15 hours of observation, I got to some results from my findings. When it came to writing the assignments where the students were told to look for the issue and correct it themselves, they were flawless. While the assignment where I hoped for the students to do this unconscious, the problem was brought back. Then in the grammar test, almost none of the students made a mistake in the part of the test that asked for them to distinguish between de and they. But in the exact same test, but another part, the same students who were flawless in just a second ago started repeating this mistake over again. Then, when it came to the oral use of the language, not a single one of the students had this kind of problem. By looking at these results, I would say it's pretty clear that this particular study speaks for awareness being of huge importance for the students' language development. It's safe to say that the students are actually able to correct themselves, but only when told so, otherwise they don't seem to be aware of the mistakes being made. Another thing that speaks for this is that when I spoke to the students about this particular problem, not a single one of them thought they had a problem with it. They actually laughed and said that no one could be that stupid to make that kind of mistake. So obviously the students aren't aware of the problems being made since the majority of the class has this problem. So my conclusion for this, and do keep in mind that this is a minor investigation with just one class. Further research has to be done to use this as a proof. But the following conclusion is based upon what I have found from this study and how I have connected this to language awareness theories. I would say that it's pretty clear that the students know the difference between the two words and the rules that separates them, since the students are able to correct themselves when told so. They are, however, not aware of the errors they are making, which, according to Schmidt's noticing hypothesis, are crucial for the learning process, which could be an explanation to why they keep making this kind of error. If we connect our results with what Svalbard said, they're not learning, it's just simply registering. And for them to start learning, the process has to be done explicit for the long-term memory to start telling them to distinguish between the two words when it comes to written language use. So, as a conclusion, I would like to thank you for listening to this, and I hope that you learned something. I certainly did. So thank you. Hello.